Today's daf is daf Tzadi Aleph, and we'll start from the top of the Amud with Omar Ravashi, and we're going to complete a sugya that we started yesterday with regard to the Mishnah that mentions Gidim, Lo nitzucha ella lishamno. The reason why the Mishnah mentions the Gidim, the sinews, is because of the Gid Anosha. What does that mean? There's a certain fat that surrounds the Gid Anosha. And the question is whether or not that fat is included in the Isa Gid Anosha. And here we have a very interesting distinction between the biblical law and the way that Klal Yisrael took upon themselves. Tisanya, Shamno Mutter. According to the strict law of the Torah, this fat of the Gid Anosha is mutter. And it's called shumon and not chelev. The Torah only prohibits chelev and not shumon. Also, when we get to the Isa Gid Anosha, we don't extend the Isa Gid Anosha to include shumon. We know that chelev is asur, shumon is mutter, the Gid Anosha is asur, but we're not going to say that the fat that surrounds the Gid Anosha is asur, but Yisrael Kedoshim Nagu Ba'Isur. Klal Yisrael, because of their sanctity, they were afraid that if they eat the fat that surrounds the Gid Anosha, they might lead to, heaven forbid, eating the Gid Anosha itself. And therefore they adopted the minhag that they would avoid eating this fat. Now, why do we burn this fat on the 16th of Nisan as if it were nosar? And the answer is because on a doraisa level, you're allowed to eat this shumon. And therefore it's included under the Isur Nosar if you didn't eat it within its allotted time, meaning before the daybreak of the 15th. We can't eat it because of the Midig Yisrael Kedoshim that Nagu Bo Isur. So we're going to have to leave it over. It becomes nosar on the 15th because midorais it's mutar b'achila. On the other hand, we can't burn it on the 15th, as we discussed yesterday, because we don't burn kodshim psulim on Yontif. So we'll burn it on the 16th. Ravina Omar, a similar approach to Ravashi. Ravina wants to again give us a category of Gid Anosha that's mutar min Torah, but we accepted upon ourselves an Isur, and therefore it's going to become nosar, and it's included under nosar because it's mutar b'achila min Torah. We can't eat it because of our chumrah. And that's Kid Rabbi Yehuda Omar Shmuel, and we discussed this as our introduction to this chapter. Omar Shmuel, and that is that Shnei Gidim Heim. There's the inner Gid, which is called the Pnimi, and the outer Gid, which is called the Chitzoni. Pnimi, the inner Gid, is Samach Le'etzem. You can identify it because it's close to the bone. And that's what the Torah says. If you violate and eat that Gid Hanosha Pnimi, then you chayv malchus. Also v'chayav v'noleh malchus. However, the Chitzon is on the other side, Samach Lebasar, it's close to the flesh. And we accepted upon ourselves an Isur to avoid eating the Chitzon. You may recall that we mentioned there are two minhagim about what the Chitzon is between Ashkenaz and the Teimanim, but in any event, we took it upon ourselves not to eat the Chitzon because it might lead us to violate the Isur Doraisa by eating the Pnimi, but Ein Chayav Nolav. So we're not violating any doraisa. Now, by definition, since the chitzon is included in the basar, and the Torah would therefore obligate you to eat it as part of the Korban Pesach, On the other hand, you're not allowed to eat it because of the minhag that accepted upon ourselves an Isur Midrabanan to avoid the chitzon. Therefore, the chitzon becomes nosar, and we have to burn it on the 15th. Now, at this point, we go back to our original suffix on Daf Sadi as to whether or not Rabbi Yehuda was definite about the right thigh, that's Gid Anosha, and on the other hand, the left thigh is not Gid Anosha, or did Rabbi Yehuda have a suffix and he didn't know which side, the right or the left, was Gid Anosha? Tashma, let's derive it from a Mishnah later on here in Chullin. And the Mishnah presents the following. Achal mizek kizais and mizek kizais. He ate a kizais of the Gid Anosha on the right side and a kizais Gid Anosha on the left side. Presumably, he received two hasros, one for the right side, one for the left side. And the Tanakama says, Sofek Shmonet. Tanakama is of the opinion that both the Gid on the right and the Gid on the left are Gid Anosha, and they generate a Chiyuv Malkus, and therefore, since he ate both from the right side and the left side, each one with Asra, therefore he violated Gid Anosha twice, and he gets twice 39 Malkus. But Rav Yehuda over Eino Sofik Ela Arboim, he only gets one set of Malkus. Presumably, he gets one set of Malkus because Mimonevshach, even if we assume that there's a suffix as to whether or not Gid Anosha according to Rav Yehuda is on the right side or the left side, but here he ate both the right side and the left side. So he definitely ate the Gid Anosha. He did not violate twice because according to Rav Yehuda there's only Gid on one side. So the Gemara says, shapir, ela tzfukim esafkale, havli asra suffik v'shaminan leil Rabbi Yehuda diyomar asra suffik lav shmei asra. So the Gemara presents the following analysis. If Rabbi Yehuda is in a situation of suffik and he doesn't know whether the Gid that the Torah prohibited is on the right thigh or on the left, then every asra that we give him before he eats the Gid on this side or before he eats the Gid on that side is asra suffik, because we don't really know if the violation of that hasra is in fact constitutes a violation of the Isur Gid Anosha. We don't know where the Gid Anosha is, on the right or on the left. And if that be the case, then we're going to try to prove now that Rabbi Yehuda holds that Hasra Safek Lav Shmei Asra, and therefore we can't give many Malkus at all. And yet, here in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda is recorded as maintaining that he does get one set of Malkus. But if it's Vadai, and Rabbi Yehuda finally came to the Achras Hadas that the Gid Anosha is on the right side, the Gemara is going to have a long discussion as to why he finally drew that conclusion. Then it makes sense that if he ate from both the right side and the left side, then the Hasra for the right side is going to generate a Chiyuv Malkus. The Hasra from the left side is nothing. He's allowed to eat it. Now, how do we prove that Rabbi Yehuda holds Hasra Safik Lav Shmei Hasra? The Sanya. Now, we're talking about a child that was born, and we're not sure if it's a 7th-month baby or a 9-month baby. We don't know. And what happened was that after this mother, this woman, was divorced by her husband or her husband died, then instead of waiting 3 months, which is called Havchana, she jumped the gun and she got married to a second husband within, let's say, 2 months after her first husband died or after her first husband delivered again. And then she gave birth to either a 9-month-old baby to the first husband or a 7th-month-old baby, a preemie, to the second husband. So basically, when this Vlad, this child, grows up, he or she doesn't know whether this is his father or this is his father. So again, I mentioned that the first husband died. Forget about that. Although that would create a suffix as to Vlad, but that's not our case, because our case is where the first husband is alive and well, which means that he delivered a get to his wife. And now there are 2 lavim the violations of which generate a chiyuv misa. One is mekalel aviv, and the other is make aviv. So if he hits both of these men, one of which we don't know who is his father, or alternatively kil azevachaz kil zeh, if he cursed both of these men, one of which is definitely his father, and now the Brisa gives a simpler case in order to introduce Rabbi Yehuda's dissenting view. Hiko shnei vasachas, kil shnei vasachas, chayev. Okay, we understand that he's chayev because although we cannot identify which klala or which hakah generated a chiyuv misa, but he definitely violated a chiyuv misa. The problem is that the hasra is always going to be hasra safek, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda Omer bevasachas chayev bazecher ze poter. If there were two hasros, that's called bazecher zeh, then each hasra in and of itself is hasra safek, which is not a valid hasra, and he can't get misa. The only case in which Rabbi Yehuda we can see that he gets misa is the case where they gave him hasra on one misa, which definitely would be mechayev him misa. Namely, don't hit both of them with one hakah, don't curse both of them with one klol. That's called bivasachas. In any event, we see clearly that Rabbi Yehuda holds that asra safek lav shmei asra. And if this be the case, then the very fact that in the case where we had before, where he ate a giranosh from the right side and from the left side, Rabbi Yehuda says he's chayv malchus, it must be because Rabbi Yehuda came to the definite conclusion that the right side is giranosh. The Gemara rejects it. Hi Tana Savala ki idach Tana Rabbi Yehuda. The Tana, the Brisa that records Rabbi Yehuda saying that you're chayav malchus, he understood that according to Rabbi Yehuda, hasra safek shmei hasra. We'll see exactly why and how we derive from another Brisa that Rabbi Yehuda holds hasra safek shmei hasra. Now, if hasra safek shmei hasra, and if we assume that Rabbi Yehuda still never came to an absolute conclusion as to which side is the real Giranosha, then in that case, we understand that if he got asra for both the right side and the left side, that he's chayv malchus. Why? Because one of those two asros is a valid asra. One of those two achilos, either on the right side or the left side, definitely generates malchus. So he gets one set of malchus. He can't get two sets of malchus because Rabbi Yehuda, knows that there's one giranosh on one side, but not knowing which side, but not on the other side. Now, how do we prove that there's another transmission of Rabbi Yehuda according to which hasra safek shmei hasra, and therefore in the case where Rabbi Yehuda doesn't know which is the giranosha, and he got asra safek for both the right side and the left side, he gets one set of malchus. That's the brisa that addresses the Isser of Nosar. Now, it's very interesting. The Isser of Nosar is a lav she'ein bo maisa, and at the same time, it's a lav hanitik liesei. So if you violate Nosar, you don't get malchus. But the Gemara is going to argue that there's a much more fundamental reason why you can't get malchus for the lav of Nosar, and that's because it's asra safek. Because what do we tell him? You got to eat the kodshim within that allotted time period. Otherwise, you get malchus. That's not so. Because an hour later, he might decide to eat the kodshim. Again, there's going to be a discussion, not here, but elsewhere, about that last moment before the day ends. But leave that out. So now, if we find a brisa that records, in this case, both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yaakov, each one respectively giving an explanation why you don't get malchus for violating Nosar, either because it's a lav hanitek liesei or it's because it's a lav she'ein bo maisa, why did they give the simple answer? Straightforward, that even if I would assume it generates malchus in and of itself, but it's hasra safek. Nosar by definition is hasra safek. Also, Sirimenu Aboker Ba'akos of this, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Litenase Achar Lotase. The Torah says, Loso Sirimenu Aboker. And the Torah says, no sir, Menu Aboker Ba'esh Tisrofu. So the mitzvah say comes to be Menatek the Lav. Lomer Shein Lokanov Div Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yaakov Homer. Why don't you get Malchus for violating Nosar? Mishum Davile Lav Shein Bo Maisev, Lav Shein Bo Maisev Lokanov. We derive Malchus from the paradigmic case of muzzling an animal, which is called lo taksam shor b'disho, and there it's a maisa because you did the action of threshing with a muzzled animal. In any event, from the fact that Rabbi Yehuda here has to come up with a reasoning to justify why there's no malchus in the violation of noser is because it's an essay that's menatek the lav. Why didn't he give the simple explanation that it's a hasra suffix? So this brisa apparently understood in their tradition that Rabbi Yehuda held that hasra suffix shmei hasra. Tashma, but maybe we could come to some conclusion in our suffix about Rabbi Yehuda from the following brisa. Achal shnei gida b'shtei Yerechos mishtei behemos. So he's got two animals, and he eats the gid from the right thigh of each of the two animals. The Tanakama says Sofik Shmona. Very simply. He ate gid anosha from one animal, he ate gid anosha from another animal. Each one had a hasra, and each one generates its own malchus. He gets two sets of malchus. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Eino Sofik Elar Boim. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, in this brisa, he only gets one set of malchus. Eino sofik al arbaim midika ama v'shtei yerechos v'shtei behemos pshita travayoli sura. The language of the brisa, as it's formulated, indicates clearly that there is a definite violation of both achilos of gid, respectively, the gid of behema number 1 and behema number 2, ul Rabbi Yehuda itzrich. And the reason why this brisa bothers to tell me that you chayav malchus for each gid that you ate from two behemoths is only to introduce the dissenting view of Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that you only get one set of malchus. Shma mino mifshet pshitole. Now, how could Rabbi Yehuda accept one set of malchus if Rabbi Yehuda doesn't know which one, the right or the left, was prohibited by the Torah? So, although it's true that he ate two gidin from two behemoths from the right side, but maybe the right side is not the gid anosh. How can he get even one set of malchus? It must be that he came to a definite conclusion. Now, if you'll ask me if he came to a definite conclusion that's on the right side, so why does he disagree with the Chachamim? Why does he hold that you only get one set of 40 malchus and not two sets of 80 malchus? And you're going to have to say that even though Rabbi Yehuda came to a definite conclusion, just one second. Oh, so that the Gemara. Let's see how the Gemara answers my question. The pshitole is a my sofik arbaim v'sulo lukei shmonim. If Rabbi Yehuda came to a definite conclusion that the gid anosh on the right side is the gid anosh of the Torah, and therefore if he ate two gidin from the right sides of two different behemoths, he should be chayav 80 malchus. Why does Rabbi Yehuda say he's only chayav 40? The only way you can get a kizayis is if you integrate the gid from animal number 1 with the gid from animal number 2, and together, if he violated both, so to speak, in one fell swoop from two behemoths, then he violated one chiyuv kizayis for gid anosha, and therefore he gets one set of malchus. Yeah, but if that be the case, then you have to add the half a zayis from one animal, the gid of one animal, and integrate it with the half a zayis of the gid of another animal. Then why would the Rabbanan say you get two sets of malchus? At the end of the day, he only ate one kizayis. And the Gemara answers that this Hanya achalovi ein bo kizayis chayev. The Tanakama holds that even if you eat a gid anosha, the entire gid anosha, and it doesn't have a kizayis, you get malchus, Rabbi Yehuda, so this is the machlokes, which we'll soon see, that applies to what's called a birya. A birya means an entire uh, limb or part of an organism. And normally the Torah says you're not chayiv malchus unless you eat a kazayis because you need the chashivus of a kazayis. But if you ate an entire birya, the chachomer of the opinion, you get malchus even for less than a kazayis. The time of Mai, where does Rabbi Yehuda? Oh, so time of Mai is already the second half of today's suit. Okay, so let me just take off my jacket because this study is quite hot. Okay, so we have to mention, and we hinted at it, that there's a general machlokas about birya, and specifically in the case of Gid Anasha, that machlokas is transmitted by this price of between the Chacham who hold that Yechai for a birya, even if it's less than a kazayis, and therefore it gets two sets of malchus for eating the gid of one animal and the gid of another animal. Rabbi Yehuda holds, no. There's no such halacha as birya. You always require, it's an absolute prerequisite for malchus that you ate a kazayis. Now, the Gemara came to the conclusion after all the back and forth shakavitari that Rabbi Yehuda holds definitely the right side is the gid anosh. He knew that there was only one gid anosha. It's either on the right thigh or on the left thigh, on the right side of the thigh or the left side of the thigh. And he finally came to the conclusion that it's on the right side. So the Gemara now wants to analyze time of Mai. What led Rabbi Yehuda, who knew that there was only one side, to the conclusion that's the gid anosha on the right side? Let's be argumentative and say maybe it's the gid anosha on the left side. And for this, we have a number of different approaches. We start with Rav. Amar Rav Amakra Ha Yorech. Why did the Torah add the hey to the word Yorech? Let me see if I can read the whole pasuk. Al kain lo yochlu b'nei Yisrael es gid anosha asher al kaf ha Yorech, hey hayidiyah. And the hey hayidiyah is called the miumenes shebiyorech, right? The more distinguished thigh. We always say the right side is more distinguished than the left side. Rabbanon, what are they going to do with the extra hay of hayorech? Hahu de poshat isur v'kuliyerech. The hayerech is going to tell you that it's only what we call the pnimi, which the gid anosha goes all the way down to the feet of the animal, which in the Gemara's language, it permeates the entire thigh. Lafuki chitzon delo, the chitzon sort of ends somewhere before it gets down to the bottom. For Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Omar, now we have another explanation as to why Rabbi Yehuda came to the conclusion that it's the right side that's the gid anosha. Omar kro behei of ko imo. The Torah describes in the parsha of the battle between the angel of Esav, the Satan, and Yaakov, that when the angel dislocated, so to speak, the thigh, it says, as he wrestled with him, the Adam shechovek es, I'm sorry, Ke Adam, it should say, Ke Adam shechovek es chaver v'yodom agas lekaf yamino shel chaver. So let's try to understand what's going on over here. You have a wrestling match face to face, and what's going to happen is in a face-to-face wrestling match, then let's call him the Malach on one side, Yaakov on the other. Then the right side of the Malach corresponds to the left side of Yaakov. Isn't that correct? Like, for example, I'm looking at you, Steve, right? So if I raise my right hand, let you raise your right hand. So now you're confusing me. Okay. If you raise your right hand, It's basically on my left, if you follow what I mean, in a face-to-face. Now what happens? The angel swings his arm around his opponent, meaning Yaakov, and he's able, through that hugging, which is called bechovek es chavero in the language of the Gemara, on the right side. Rab Shmuel bar Nachmani Omar, ki ovek kochav nidmalo. There's a whole sugya as to who Yaakov identified. It wasn't until the very end, with daybreak, that Yaakov identified his opponent as a malach. So according to the opinion of Shmuel bar Nachmani, Yaakov Avinu identified this opponent as an oved kochavim, an idolater. Now, whenever you get close to an idolater, it's like a Hamasnik almost. You have to worry about terrorism, that he might attack you and kill you, because the oved kochavim will chush it on ritzicha, especially when it comes to Jewish blood is hefker. Let's say you're traveling in a road together with an oved kochavim and you want to protect yourself. So what do? Toflo liyamino. Put the idol worshiper on your right side and you stand on his left side. So therefore, it makes sense now that Yaakov Avinu was traveling, so to speak, or standing on the left side of the angel. And once again, if the angel is now on the right side, Yaakov is on his left, then he's going to swing around and hit Yaakov on the right side. However, Rav Shmuel bar Acha had a different pshat Talmid Chacham nidmelo, that the angel appeared to Yaakov as a Talmid Chacham. And where do you stand if you're walking together with the Talmid Chacham? The Omer Mar liyamin Rabbah. You should stand on the right side, and your Rebbe should be on the left side. No, that's not fair. That's not kavod. Harei bur. You should be standing on the left side and give your Rebbe the honor of being on the right side. And once again, if the Rebbe is on the right side and you're standing on the left side, the angel that appears as the Talmid Chacham is on the right side, and Yaakov Avinu, his opponent, is on the left side, then when the angel, again, swings around to hit Yaakov, well, guess what? Yaakov's on the left, he's going to hit Yaakov on the right. Rabbanon, me'achorei osa v'nashe b'travayim. Again, the Rabbanon hold that both the Gid Anosha on the right side as well as the Gid Anosha on the left side both have the status of Gid Anosha, which means that the angel that wrestled against Yaakov hit Yaakov on both sides. And that's called Nashe b'travayim. So what's the hey hayidiyah that indicates that there's one Gid Anosha that's more pronounced, more significant than the other? He needs it for another statement of Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Melamed shehelu avak, that this Beheyavko, the Hey Ayidiyah, tells you something about this wrestling match that makes it unique in all of history. Avak margalosam, Helu avak margalosam ad kisei hakavod. The dust from this wrestling match reached all the way to the kisei hakavod. How do we know this? We know it from a pasuk in Nachum. Ksiv hakabe'avakol, ksiv hasam in Nachum. It says v'anan avek raglat. Now, what does it mean that this is so special that the dust went all the way up to the throne of glory? So the Rashba says that this has to do with a principle called Maisa Avos Simon Lebanim. And all the difficulties that Yaakov Avinu faces are all foretell the exile and the major exiles of Jewish history. And the struggle of Yaakov against the Malach, which is a struggle against Esav, the struggle of the Jewish people against the descendants and the successors of Esav, and his cohort Yishmael, because they married into each other. So all this difficulty takes place at night in the darkest of exiles. Probably the Shoah would be the example, until the dawn of the Geula. And the descendants of Esav will attempt to uproot the Jews entirely. They'll be unable to do so. The dust of their struggle reaches all the way up to the throne of glory, the Kisei HaKavod. The battle relates to the most fundamental theological issues of the Yud Gimel Ikrei Adas. The battle will not end until the day that the Kisei HaKavod is Chullin, at the end of the destruction of Amalek. The Amar of Yeshua ben Levi, Lama Nikra Shmo Gid Hanoshe. What's the word Noshe here? Why the Torah gave it that name? Shenosha Mimkomo. It sort of jumped out of its place. V'ola, and it moved upwards. V'cheinu Omer, another pasuk that we have, which is in Yirmiyahu and Novi, that Noshsa Gvurasam Hayu L'Noshim. Noshsa means the power, the strength just jumped away from them. They became weak. And the pasuk compares them to women who they are the weakest sex. Fine. Om Rabbi Yossi Reb Chanina, my dichsiv. We're talking about the Gid Hanoshe. What does it mean when it says Davar Shalach Adoni Ado, and then we say Noi B'Yakov Nafal B'Yisrael? So we darshan it in the following way. Says Rabbi Yossi, Davar Shalach B'Yakov Ze Gid Hanoshe. V'Nafal B'Yisrael Sheposhat Isuro B'Chol Yisrael. So what's the chiddush here of Rabbi Yossi's drasha? The dislocation, says the Marsha, of Yaakov's thigh by the angel, the Gid Hanoshe, is the reason why the Gid Hanoshe became prohibited throughout Israel as a memory. So we shall always remember how Yaakov Avinu's life was in danger and Hashem saved him. The injury to Yaakov's thigh would manifest itself throughout Jewish history in violent attacks against the righteous men and women of all generations. However, if later generations would engage in tshuva, they would not have to experience this violence. Therefore, Yeshayahu, when he rebukes his generation, he says the Gid Hanoshe was prohibited for all time to serve as a reminder to do tshuva, to turn away from your evil ways. Rabbi Yossi, Reb Chanina, my dichsiv. Yosef invites his brothers to a festive meal. They don't recognize Yosef. And the pasuk describes it as Tvoach Tevach V'Hachin. There's a double language here, to have meat slaughtered, and prepare it. So what's the double language, Tvoach Tevach? Yosef felt that maybe he didn't have the right hechsher. Maybe the brothers wouldn't want to eat from the meat because it wasn't badatz. So what does he do? Paro lehem beis hashchita v'hachen. Paro lehem beis hashchita, right? That's not only tavach was it slaughtered properly, but tavach again, that he exposed the beis hashchita so they could see that it was a perfectly good shchita. V'hachen. What's the extra word v'hachen? is told Gid Anosha B'fneim. He stripped the animal after shechita of the Gid Anosha in their presence, so they would know. However, the Gemara says, well, you're assuming that the Bnei Yaakov would not be able to eat meat unless it was shechted properly. They would not be able to eat the Gid Anosha, and that reflects the shita that Gid Anosha Nesel Bnei Noah. We had a machlokas in yesterday's stuff whether Isur Gid Anosha applies to non-Jews, and before Matan Torah, the Bnei Yaakov had the status of Bnei Noah. Now that itself is a gigantic issue. And if you ever heard of the Mishnah Lamelech, super commentary on the Rambam from Rav Yaakov Rosnas, who lived about 3 centuries ago in Spain, he wrote an entire work called the Parshas Drachim to try to figure out what was the status of the Avos and the Shvatim, were they Yisrael, were they... But anyway, this Gemara certainly reflects the Shita that the Shvatim were Bnei Noah. Now we go on to analyze this wrestling match between Yaakov and Sarah Shalisa. Vayivasar Yaakov Levado. Yaakov is all alone. Why does the Torah tell me that? So the answer is that there was a Nahar Kol Yabok, and Yaakov left his whole entire family on one side of the Nahar, which they had crossed over to, and then he went back to where they crossed alone, Shenishtayr, because he realized that he had left behind him. Sounds so typical. We go out. In our family, it's not a question of did we leave anything behind, but what did we leave behind? Anyway, Pachim Ktanim, he goes back for small jars. Mikan, from here we want to learn, Dil Tzadikim Shechov Aleim Amonim Yosem B'Guf. You can't take this literally, as the Mefarshim say. You can't say that a person's, little jugs and any other monetary possessions that he acquires is more important to him than his life itself. But rather, gufam here doesn't mean life, but rather gufam means like sort of suffering, pain. The kol kach lama, why go back for pachim ktanim? Why is that so important? L'fishein posting yadam begesel, because a tzaddik is very careful. His money is pure. Is pure. He doesn't even dream of taking something from somebody else. He's machmir, even in case of who knows what, maybe. And therefore, this is really his possession. It's his. And God gave it to him, and it was bestowed upon him for a purpose. It becomes part of his tzuras ha'adam so that he could use it for avodas Hashem. Vayavek imo ishimo adalos hashachar. When is the angel wrestling with Yaakov going to check out? Only with the break of dawn. Why? Because Rabbi Yitzchak is teaching us. Now again, we're going to see there are many ways of deriving that same conclusion, but a Talmid Chacham should not go out at night. And here we have a toast with a whole discussion. What happens if there's a livui and he has an escort? Is he allowed to go out at night? But in any event, the Malach is teaching us he wouldn't go away from Yaakov until daybreak. He adds another element here into the equation, that the angel represents the forces of destruction, and we're going to learn from Ad Alos HaShachar that those forces of destruction are empowered to do harm only at night. And therefore, it's dangerous for Talmid Chacham to remain alone without protection at night when it's dark, because that's when the forces of destruction are empowered to do harm. Now, in general, I don't think it's such a great idea to go out at night, but apparently the forces of destruction have a more profound interest in attacking a Talmid Chacham. And now we get to Rav Abba Bar Kahana Amar Mehachi. He's going to have a different source from which we derive the conclusion that Talmid Chacham is not supposed to go out at night.